Good evening, and thank you for joining tonight's conversation about leading in the time of change. Williams College has long prided itself on developing individuals equipped to lead in many contexts through a curriculum that stresses problem solving and expression of ideas, a learning environment that features close interaction with outstanding professors and staff, and many co-curricular offerings. As a result, Williams alumni are equipped with the knowledge, experience, empathy, and integrity they need to lead effectively. And lead you do in fields as diverse as business, government, the arts, law, medicine, academia, and the not-for-profit sector. I really can't imagine a better way to wrap up our academic year and kick off Reunion 2021 than spend the next few minutes with these three alumni who stand out in their roles as accomplished leaders. While our audience is most likely familiar with each of you and eager to get into the conversation, I'll briefly introduce you, and after I do so, please take 2 minutes to share something that people don't necessarily know about you and that has influenced the leader you are today. I'll begin with Adena Testa Friedman from the class of '91. You became president and CEO of NASDAQ 4.5 years ago and have been recognized for significantly shaping NASDAQ's transformation into a leading global exchange and technology solutions company with operations across 6 continents. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about how you led that transformation. But to kick us off, what is something that people don't necessarily know about you and that has influenced the leader you are today?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Maud, for having me tonight. And it's really great to be joined by Clarence and Jonathan. So really terrific. Well, I think a lot of people know a lot about me, but I'll give you a couple things that kind of joined together. One is when I was in college, I actually learned how to, I became a private pilot. I learned how to fly. I learned how to fly at the North Adams Airport. And certainly that really helped manage panic. when you're in a plane and things are going wrong, the worst thing you can possibly do is panic. So that was certainly a great leadership lesson and one that I've carried through my career. And the second is Taekwondo. I take Taekwondo and I've studied Taekwondo for many years now. And again, you have to learn to take the punches as well as give them. So learning to stand up and manage through both the offense and the defense without panicking is a very important part of Taekwondo as well. So I guess those are the leadership lessons I've taken away from that.
That's perfect. I might have to hop over to the airport and pick up a few lessons there of my own. Good tip. Moving now to Clarence Otis from the class of '77. During the decade you served as CEO and chairman of Darden Restaurants, you were lauded for creating and sustaining a motivating and inclusive culture. And Darden was recognized for 4 consecutive years by Fortune magazine as one of the 100 best places to work. You've since brought your talents to bear as a sought-after board member in the corporate and not-for-profit worlds, including at our own Williams College. And last fall, you were named the chair of the board of Jazz at Lincoln Center Jazz. I'm really eager for you to share some of the lessons you learned as you set out to create an inclusive culture at Darden, something we are all currently striving to do in the organizations we lead. But maybe before we get to that, what is something that people don't necessarily know about you that has influenced the leader you are today?
Well, Maud, I'd like to start by thanking you as well. This is a great opportunity. I appreciate the chance to share with the group tonight. I guess the thing people don't know is I was a theater kid. And so I was an econ poli-sci major. Some of the folks who were there when I was there may know it, but I was a theater kid. I started early in elementary school and then grew up down the street from the Watchtowers, which had a Watchtowers Art Center. And so my sister Deborah, who's a year after me at Williams, and I were at the Art Center and we learned theater. We carried that passion to Williams with some like-minded people there. We started the Black Repertory Theater Company, did a lot of productions, mostly acting at Williams, but directing later while I was at Stanford Law School, and then afterwards for the first couple of years while I was practicing law. And so acting's always been a big thing for me, theater. And I think the thing that it taught me was really how to get into other people's heads and hearts, whether that's the characters or the playwright or the director. And that was an important leadership sort of attribute, really how to walk in other people's shoes and be empathetic and understand where they're coming from.
That's terrific. It's also a really great way to get used to talking in front of lots of people, right?
That's right.
Getting used to crowds.
And managing panic.
Managing panic. Yes,
The lights go
I
up.
see a
Yeah.
theme emerging here. Thank you. And last but not least, Jonathan Kraft from the class of '86. Jonathan, as the president of the Kraft Group, you are responsible for overseeing the day-to-day activities of a diverse range of operating businesses across industries, as diverse as paper and packaging, real estate, investing, and sports and entertainment. In addition, you lead in service to other organizations, most notably and currently as the chair of the board of Mass General Hospital, the largest single private employer in the Commonwealth. No doubt your years as a Williams trustee also prepared you well for this role. We are eager to learn more from you about what it's been like to lead a major healthcare institution during a pandemic. But first, maybe you could share something that people don't necessarily know about you that influenced you, the leader you are today.
Sure. Thanks, Maud, and thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be with you and Adena and Clarence. my thing, I guess, wouldn't be anywhere near as brave as Adena's, flying into North Adams surrounded by mountains. I can't imagine you could learn to fly in any more crazy place, and certainly not as impactful as what Clarence did with the Art Center in Watts. I guess the thing that if I look back on my life, the thing that was most impactful to what I've been able to do in my professional life, the thing that had the biggest impact was in my summers after my freshman and sophomore year at Williams. I worked the overnight shift on the factory floor of a paper mill in South Carolina, and I lived in a Holiday Inn. And for a kid that had grown up, I traveled a lot around the world, but I grew up pretty sheltered in the Northeast, went to, high school and college and was around mostly similar people. And to go down to the South and to be in 120 degrees and humidity on the floor of a paper mill working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. with people who for decades had worked in that environment, and to hear them talk about their lives, how they viewed the bosses, how they viewed the company, and they have a kid there that they're trying to impart wisdom to. I think the guys I worked with, and it was only guys, so I'm not using guys at the exclusion of anybody, but taught me a lot about how I think if I ever did get the chance to manage a business or businesses, how you want to think about things with a workforce and what's important to them, and really what, not just at work, but what they think about in their lives when they're not at work. And I rely on those 2 summers quite a bit in almost everything I do every day. So I think that would be the thing that had the greatest impact on me.
Well, that's really wonderful. And it's lovely that in answering that question, you all went back so far in your lives, because I think it is actually a testament to the way in which the long trajectory of our developments and how that affects us as we develop. Well, thank you so much for sharing those words of introduction. I want to return to the theme of our conversation now and focus on leading during the past year in particular. And Jonathan, I'll begin with you. One of the big discoveries that I've certainly had from the experience of this past year is that while higher ed institutions traditionally really take a very deliberative, some might even say glacial approach to decision making and change, the Williams team really did an incredible job of swiftly devising and executing the plan to successfully and safely bring our students back to campus last fall. Something that seemed impossible to many, and I know you and I chatted in those weeks and months as we tried to get there and worked through hurdle after hurdle. Yet the Kraft Group was involved in an extraordinary collaboration in the early days of COVID to bring 1 million desperately needed N95 masks to the United States from China. And I think folks would be really interested in hearing a bit about how that came about.
Sure. Maybe I'd just back up 2 seconds and say, well, first of all, you and the college did an extraordinary job because you decided early on, and I think a great lesson in leadership is when you feel something's right and you make a decision to march forward with laser focus, thinking about all the contingencies. And I really want everyone in the Williams community to know you did that. As relates to and I was really proud to be a Williams alum when you announced we were coming back on campus. That was very meaningful. Boston was one of the early hotspots right after New York and New Jersey during the pandemic, at the start of the pandemic, back at the end of February, beginning of March. And in March and April, a couple times a week, I would walk the COVID ICUs at Mass General. And I think now 15 or 16 months later, people forget. But the issue of PPE was very, very real. And at arguably one of our country's great academic medical centers, there were nurses and doctors. But I looked at the nurses, you know, a lot of women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, who were in the hospital on 12, 14-hour shifts with intubated patients, people being intubated, stuff flying everywhere, and taking care of them selflessly, but at the same time, knowing that we were asking our nurses and our doctors to reuse masks for more than a day at a time, multiple days, just a simple surgical mask. And I could get way off on that, but it was frustrating. And at the hospital, we were trying desperately to get masks. And then like on March 20th or 21st, I was actually on a Mass General finance call talking about the impact the pandemic was going to have on our finances. And my cell phone rang, and it was the governor. And the governor and I go back about 30 years. And I think this whole story, as you age in life, and I think people that are lucky to be put in positions of management or leadership get to meet lots of people. And I think keeping relationships is really important, because you never know when they can come in handy. And when you've had a personal connection with somebody, a lot of value can come from that. So the governor, who's been a friend of mine for 30 years, long before he was ever thinking about politics, said, "Hey, I need your help." He goes, "I got 1.5 million masks in China. I've secured them. They're ours. I have to get them here." He said, "How do I get airplanes to do this? Do I just call 10, 15 guys? Do I charter something?" I said, "Charlie, the people who have airplanes, little planes, you can't, 1.5 million masks, you need a cargo plane." And I said, I started to think, and then I said, wait, you know, we fly our football team around on a 767. We had decided a few years back to buy one rather than charter. And fortunately, we had done that. And I said, let me see if we can get our plane to China. And the good news was we could, but what I didn't fully appreciate was China had shut everything down to the US from air travel. And if you're going to take goods in and out of there, nobody cares about humanitarian missions in the middle of a pandemic. And what I thought at the time was going to be very easy, just sending a plane over, turned out to be very complicated. And without going through the whole story, I would just say that relationships with someone like Jim Kim, who was a college president at Dartmouth, but who had founded Partners in Health before he was president of Dartmouth, was now running the World Bank. And China wasn't letting planes in, but Jim Kim went right to Xi and said, "Hey, we've got masks. You got to let these people come in." And that sort of opened up the bureaucracy a little bit. But even then, the Chinese government wasn't going to let us land without visas. And I don't even want to walk through this whole story, but I'll just tell you, it took us 10 days to get the permission to go over. And when we did, though, the Chinese put one last criteria on us, which was if anybody left the airplane, you were subject to a 14-day quarantine. So we put 3 full crews on the plane that the FAA said could sleep on the plane and all this stuff. But then we had to fly with techs, because the Chinese were only going to give us 3 hours on the ground. And we got some engineers and techs that work with us to agree that if there was a mechanical with the plane, they would fix it and stay in China for 14 days. That's real leadership and stay quarantined. And this is back at the end of March of last year. I mean, just think how different the world was. That was bravery on their part. So we flew over with a bunch of spare parts, and crew. But then the other thing that had happened was the governor had secured these masks, but they were in warehouses all over the country, and China had stopped wanting to let PPE leave the country because they were afraid of a shortage there. And so a gentleman who had run Goldman Sachs Asia, who's on the board of Mass General, and I apologize, I know this is a long-winded story, but he had helped Tencent, which is one of China's largest companies, get started. And I called him because we had to get the masks to the airport. And Tencent, a Chinese company, took their own employees and went around the country, secured them at the various warehouses they were at, and then guarded them for us because they were afraid they would get stolen at the airport. And then they used their contacts to get them through customs and get us loaded. And we only had 3 hours on the ground, and we're not a cargo plane. We got them loaded in 2 hours and 57 minutes. And when they got back here, in retrospect, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but I remember my next trip into the hospital, nurses being very emotional about it, as were all of us. So anyhow, that's.
I remember it being a very big deal at the time, actually reading about it and thinking, now, could we just take that plane, detour it up here to the Northern Berkshires and drop off just 1 or 2 cartons?
We took some to New York. New York was in a real bad strait, and we took 300,000 to New York. And that was an example of real leadership too, not by us, but by our governor, because our governor had secured these, and we saw what was going on in New York, and the Governor Baker was good with 300,000 going down to Governor Cuomo in New York to help out there. One last quick thing at Mass General, the woman that ran the COVID ICUs brilliantly is a Williams grad named Catherine Hibbert, and she's one of my heroes. I believe she graduated in the 90s. And in March and April of last year, if you got COVID and you were at Mass General, you had almost an 85% chance walking out of the hospital with your health. In other parts of the country, those numbers were reversed in March and April, where once you got to the ICU and you were intubated, you had an 85% chance of not making it out. And I really give Catherine huge kudos for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, sharing that story. And it does sound like a nail biter. And going back to some of the comments about panic and Taekwondo, some of these skills, I think, come in very handy in these moments. Clarence, I wonder if we could turn to you now to talk a little bit as in your role as board chair for Jazz at Lincoln Center, and as someone who spent much of your recent career in the hospitality industry, your work has really touched on some of the arenas most affected by COVID. And I'm wondering what you see as the next important steps to strengthening and repairing the arts and the hospitality sectors of the economy, which were so damaged by the pandemic realities.
Well, I'll start with the hospitality sectors. COVID, as we all know, had differential effects depending on who you were. We certainly saw that with the disease itself, but in the commercial arena as well. And so my old shop, Darden, is a Fortune 400 company. And so it had access to capital that allowed it to get through. So it, draw down bank loans, it did a secondary, it suspended its dividend, all of that to free up a couple $2 billion, which would allow it to ride out having its doors shut for a year plus. But smaller entities, smaller restaurants, independent restaurants didn't have that luxury. And so many of them really scrambled. A lot of them didn't make it. Some of the ones that did make it made it because of government support through some of the programs that were crafted. And as we look forward, what we're going to see really in hospitality, but in retail in general, is that the giants will be there. And so we'll have the big chains. The independents have been thinned out. And the ones that remain really need help, because what we're talking about, reopening, is really opening that business again. And so they had the support to pay the rent and get through, but now they've got costs associated with reopening. And so we need to make sure that there's affordable capital for those folks. There's affordable capital for the experienced restaurateurs that didn't make it, because there are locations and there are employees, and there are customers. And so they need access to affordable capital. They should get that because they have the experience, they know what they're doing, and they can reopen. Absent that, we're going to have a landscape that really is dominated by the bigger chains, whether that's hospitality and restaurants or retail. On the art side, a little bit of the same thing. And it affected different venues differently. And then venues were affected differently than individual artists. And so you have places like Jazz at Lincoln Center, I mean, it's a disaster. You know, a budget of $65 million with 2/3 of that is earned income. That 2/3 goes away, and you're stuck with contributed income. And people stepped up. And so that contributed income number rose, but a lot of triage to make it through. But they were able to make it through. They're an institution in their own right. Some of the smaller venues, again, government support helped a few of them get through, but a lot had to close their doors. And so they're going to need that access to capital to reopen. And then the artists are essentially independent contractors. And so they had to scramble just to make ends meet, in many cases abandon their art. And they're in a position where, you know, they have to make commitments so far out that even the reopening that's occurring right now doesn't get it for many of them. They really are focused on 9, 12, 15 months from now. And so they need a hand, a bridge from here to there. And so it still is about, in my view, a pretty significant sort of government support function for the arts.
I appreciate that. And in the theme that we're focusing on around leadership, it really is, it's not just leadership through these moments of crisis, but also how you rebuild afterwards. And how you
there's been terrific leadership. I would give kudos to Chuck Schumer.
Yeah.
He really insisted in the last relief package on a venues financing source, and that's helped.
Yeah.
But more is going to be needed.
Yeah, and we'll have to continue to build strong institutions, which as I transition to Adena, maybe we can talk a little bit about that in a broader sense. You've really been heralded as a leader for your inclusion work at NASDAQ. And I was wondering if you could tell us about your commitments in that space in particular and what you've been seeking to achieve and why.
Great, well, thanks. Well, I think that we all recognize that the last 15 months have been kind of a moment for us all to reflect on all of the, the society we live in, but also all of the challenges that we've had to face through a very challenging time, both in terms of the impacts of the pandemic, as well as, of course, the social injustice and equity issues that we know as a society we all still face. And NASDAQ has been examining the issue of governance within companies for many years. And one of the things that we do at NASDAQ is we are a self-regulatory organization, and we have rules associated with enabling companies to tap the public markets and get access to public investors. And over the years, we've really examined and studied governance as being a key part of risk controls and controlling the company from a risk perspective, and of course, managing the company from a fiduciary perspective. And one of the areas that we looked at very closely over time has been diversity on boards. We also, in addition to owning and operating the markets here in the US, we own and operate many of the markets in the Nordics, and they have been kind of on the forefront of some of the diversity efforts at the board level. So one of we announced back in December that we are proposing new rules associated with board governance for companies that are listed on NASDAQ. And the rules are really focused on disclosure. The first of the rules is to require that any company that comes to NASDAQ has to provide disclosure of the composition of their boards from a diversity perspective based on self-reported information from the board members, but then anonymized and put into a table. And that just gives investors more information associated with making decisions, investment decisions. And then the second is an encouragement for companies to move forward in having some level of minimum diversity on their boards. The first being at least one woman and one underrepresented minority or LGBTQ member of the board. And we're giving the companies 4 years to implement that. And if they don't, their only obligation is to explain within their public disclosures why they haven't been able to, or what maybe they've taken a different approach to diversity or other things that they want to explain to their investors. But it does encourage companies to really focus in on diversity as a core component of governance. I think that people ask, why do we think that this is important? And I think obviously there's societal reasons why, but there's also pretty good evidence that's been mounting within research that's been done by private organizations and academics that show that more diversity on boards results in better risk controls, and there's some correlation of also improved financial performance for those companies with more diverse boards. So we do feel like that the evidence is there, as well as I think that we all understand that this is an opportunity to create more opportunities for leaders for companies that then creates an environment where inclusiveness becomes part of the dialogue at the board level. So we are hopeful that the SEC will approve it. It's going through a standard process. We've gone through 2 comment periods. 85% of all of the comments have been positive, coming from investors, corporates, advocacy groups, the government. And so now it's up to the SEC to make a determination. They have a few more months to make a determination of whether or not they'll approve the rule.
Oh, that's an amazing initiative, and I'm interested to hear that how positive the feedback's been, and it actually is a good bridge to a topic I was hoping we could all discuss. But maybe I'll start with a follow-up just to you about this. As a college president, I find the realities of social media and the divisive politics of the society that we're living in today to be one of the biggest challenges of leading a campus, and in some ways any small community, and I assume also non-academic spaces as well. I'm wondering if this is an equally big challenge for you, and how you see it larger than NASDAQ per se. And so I guess I'm particularly interested in the follow-up to this question of the support you're getting in this space, because there's been a lot of backlash to these kinds of moves as well, right?
Well, I have to say, I mean, certainly within NASDAQ, we have what I think is a great culture of people being, they're willing to email me and let me know what their opinions are. I get, I have a, I address our entire employee base every 2 weeks. We have a lot of back and forth, a lot of inclusion and a lot of involvement, and we use the employee networks. We have 12 employee networks within NASDAQ that can give us different perspectives and points of view as we're developing these types of proposals. And we actually did go out and talk to our employee networks in the process of putting this proposal together. And then we also went out and talked to different industry organizations and investor groups and others to make sure that we understood kind of the impact on different industries. So I have to say the process that we've gone through has been, actually quite unifying in many respects. And the support we've gotten from the investment community has been universally positive. Well, I would say almost universally positive. I can't say universally, but almost universally positive. And you can see that reflected in almost, the 200 comment letters that have come in. But I also would say that it's, not every media outlet has thought this was a good idea. And so you have to kind of manage through that and recognize that our country is founded on on respectful debate. And when you are trying to create change, you have to expect debate. And I welcome that. I think that's the whole point of the comment period with the SEC, is to allow for respectful debate. And then enables the SEC to make a more informed choice and a more informed decision. So I have to say that I think the process has been very healthy, very respectful, but there's been a lot of debate. So I think that's an important part of the process.
Which is important, yeah. So then what would you characterize as the biggest challenge you face right now in your organization?
Oh, you're asking me, okay.
Yeah. So, then I'll let you off the hook, and I'll ask my other two victims.
Well, actually, if I were to say like right this minute, I think the biggest challenge has been, it was a big challenge to move our employees from an in-office environment to an at-home environment. Mm-hmm. And we had to do that in the midst of the pandemic and frankly, at the height of the crisis moments of the pandemic. The markets were more active than we'd ever experienced in our history. Obviously the trading was quite frenetic, and we didn't know what was going to happen to the economy. And we still in a period of 2 days, we sent all of our employees home around the world. And we knew we could operate the markets remotely, but to do, we'd done all of our BCP planning, our business continuity planning, we do it in real life was quite a different thing. And it worked well. And that was great. It was a really proud moment for all the team. Now the next challenge now is, okay, now how do we bring people back to an office? How do we get people to reconnect in person, but still provide more flexibility? And so that's our next challenge, is having people kind of take that next leap with us to understand what I call the next new normal is going to be, in terms of that what we're calling it the NASDAQ blend, kind of the hybrid environment that we want to create for our employees going forward. So if you were to ask me, our current challenge is that, in addition to managing through an extremely active time in the markets, we've onboarded almost probably between 800 and 1,000 people in the last year, and they've never set foot in an office. So you know, we've had a very busy time here, and I'm making sure that we continue to focus on the strength of our team, the health of our team, and at the same time managing through a very heightened period of activity.
Wonderful. And Jonathan, how about for you? What would you say is the biggest challenge facing the organizations you lead at the moment?
Well, a lot of what Adena said, and by the way, what she is doing at the NASDAQ is pretty special, and I think she's leading the way across her entire industry. We have the same issues across all of our operating businesses of how you get people back to work. So it's very similar to what Adena said, and I would tip my hat to her for how many people they've been able to onboard. Our biggest challenge, on top of how we come back to in person, you know, both for our employees and all the things they have to manage in their lives, but also psychologically, is actually hiring people. I'd say that is right there with it today. We cannot hire people. One of our core businesses is brown boxes and brown paper, and our manufacturing facilities stayed open even at the beginning because we were deemed an essential industry, and you saw what happened with e-commerce. And our factories aren't near big urban areas. You know, there's not a lot of competition for things, and you can offer pretty large entry-level wages today, and people don't want to come to work. So what we've decided to do, they don't want to apply for jobs. The current employees come to work, and instead of having to keep going up to try to get people to apply, and then who likely are only doing it because they were enticed by a number that was much bigger than it was 6 months ago, I've said, let's go to our existing employees and offer them bonuses for every 90 days and for overtime that they work. And let's get through the shakeout of people coming back and reward the people who've been loyal to us, rather than start to increase wages that you can't keep there for the long term, and you're not even attracting good people. And we just started that a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's starting to have a little bit of effect. But hiring people is still, it's probably our biggest challenge right now.
Yeah, I think we were so reacting to the individually sort of day-to-day challenges, and as we were doing that, we were watching the nature of work change really dramatically. And now I think so many of us are facing that in a wide variety of institutions. Clarence, how about for you? What are you seeing out there as some of the biggest challenges right now?
Well, I think in my current role, really as a board member, I think the biggest challenge is around when do you participate in the public conversation. I mean, there are a lot of conversations going on. Obviously, in addition to COVID, we had the social justice, the racial equity conversation. There are all kinds of other things that come up. And I think as I think about it, there are some issues that are so important that you have to say something, you have to do something. Racial equity is one of those, in my view. It's so foundational an issue in the United States. It's one that's plagued us for a long time. It's the root of many of the problems that we face as a country. And so sort of finally stepping out and dealing with that. Climate change is another. Now, what you say and what you do ought to reflect sort of who you are. So every organization that I've been part of, every company really has a culture. And you talk about it internally. You talk about sort of larger purpose in the work that you do, the role that each person, depending on their position in the organization, plays in delivering that purpose, the values that you have as you work together to deliver that purpose. And so you ought to look to that purpose and to those values when you think about what am I going to say about an issue, what am I going to do about it, and even whether I ought to weigh in. There are some issues that aren't as foundational, as fundamental. And in those cases, I think the filter ought to be, is this something that really touches on the culture of the organization? Is it something that really speaks to what we say we're all about? If it does, then we have to talk about it. We've got to do something. If it doesn't, we don't necessarily have to weigh in on that issue. But I think trying to sift through which issues are important enough to put the institutional voice behind and which aren't is one of those things that we've got to grapple with.
Yeah, it's true that employees and consumers and patrons of all kinds are now paying much more attention to the way corporations and organizations shape policy and practice. And then that helps them decide where they want to work or what they want to buy or where they want to invest and engage. So it does feel like social responsibility is becoming increasingly more of an expectation for a wide variety of institutions. And I think what you're referring to gets us to think about what it means for leaders, CEOs, boards for addressing these kinds of social issues. And you seem to be suggesting a certain kind of best practice for when and how to take a stand. Do you have any advice for others out there for sort of thinking about how to sift through those decisions that you've just talked about?
Yeah, I really do think it's all about, if something, it's what do you say to yourself about yourself? Mm. And if something really is at the core of that's going on in conversation outside, then your employees or your customers or your shareholders expect you to step up and talk about it. I mean, it's bullseye on what you say to yourself about yourself. Mm-hmm. If it's not, then it's probably one of those things where you don't have to really weigh in. And then some things are just foundational to the American construct. And so you have to really talk about it. I mean, for me, one of those things is certainly voting rights. And I led an effort to get companies to come out and really make a comment about some of the voting legislation that's been passed recently, because I felt that it was really about voter suppression. Right. And so if you're interested in racial equity, you have to talk out, you have to speak on that, because voter suppression is the primary reason why we have racial inequity. Absent voter suppression, going back 170 years, we wouldn't have this level of inequity.
Right. Yeah. No, and I appreciate you speaking out on that issue in particular. It's one that I think a lot about myself, and its enduring impact. So I agree that the more institutions that speak out on that issue, the better. Jonathan, how about for you when you think about making these kinds of decisions in a leadership capacity? What do you think are some of the best practices for thinking about how to take a stand in these complex social issues?
Well, I think Clarence said it right. You have to, first of all, you got to be sure that what you're speaking out on rises to the level that Clarence just described. And in the last year, you've seen an awful lot of instances of that. And then I think when you speak as a business, it's important not to speak in cliches and canned phrases, but to really think about what your statement is going to be, and to have it reflect your values and your own emotions. And I can tell you the statement, when we put out statements like that for our organization, someone may draft a first draft, but I pretty much end up writing it, because ultimately when you're a private business, as opposed to a public company like Clarence talked about, the good news is you don't have to answer to a lot of people, but it also really reflects your family name and what you're about. So there aren't people in our media department writing it, I write it. And then that way, if people have an issue with it, they know right who they can come talk to about it. And I will tell you that happens, and I welcome it when it does happen. So
Thank you.
that's the way we try to handle it. It's nice not having public shareholders because
It
that
does
makes
make a
it
difference.
that makes it a lot. I don't envy Clarence or Adena on that front.
Adena, how about you? Do you have some thoughts about how and which and in what ways we tackle these kinds of complex social issues?
Yeah, I think the first thing I always focus on is our employees first, frankly. I want to make sure our employees understand how I'm feeling about it, but also how we see it as NASDAQ, and so that they can hear it straight from me. So we use the biweekly all hands calls to share comments about that. The second thing is to work with the employee networks so that they can also bring people in who can share perspectives on that with all the employees. And we've, the great thing about Zoom and the Zoom world we've lived in is we can engage our employees very quickly, very easily, and globally. And so we really do focus first and foremost on making sure our employees understand how we're looking at these issues and what we care about, and also making sure we have a discussion about it so that we can get different perspectives in the room and make sure that those are heard. I think that then we do take a little bit of a different approach to how much of that do we then discuss externally, because I think as a public company and as a steward for thousands of other public companies, we have to be mindful, and also frankly a highly regulated business that has a lot of interactions with Washington. We take a little bit, we kind of elevate the discussion as to how many of those positions are core to our mission. How many do we want to make sure that we really have to stand behind and be a part of, because those issues really either have an existential impact on our business or have an existential impact on the societies in which we operate, and therefore they have they have a nexus to our purpose and our mission. And so we go through that process. I have 2 advisors within the organization that really help me think those things through. And definitely, Jonathan, if we ever do put out any public statements, I am very, very involved in crafting them to make sure that they reflect the voice as I want it to be reflected. And I think it's so important because, these issues are, they're highly emotional. So you want to make sure you're conveying whatever you want to convey in a way that will reflect on you. And that I know that these are the types of things that will be heard and listened to, and I'll have to speak about in multiple forums. So I want to make sure that it reflects the voice of NASDAQ the right way.
Thank you. So moving more to broader questions about leadership, I was hoping you could share with our audience tonight maybe an example of the best and worst leadership advice you've ever received. You can pick one or the other, or do both if you'd like. I've noticed in my role that I get a lot of advice on leadership, actually, usually with that word in it. William should lead, and then a piece of advice about what follows after that. I'm wondering what in your own walks of life, where you've found good guidance and where you've been led astray by well-meaning offers from folks about suggesting directions you might go. So, and does one of you want to go first for the question here?
I'll start, and I guess it wasn't so much leadership advice, but it was just a striking leadership example. And it was really my predecessor as CEO of Darden, Joe Lee. And so Joe was a founder of Red Lobster. They sold the business to General Mills. He went with it, along with his boss, who the company's named after, Bill Darden, and they built it out. They built Olive Garden, and then they were spun out as a separate company 20 plus years later, and Joe was the CEO of the new public company. So that's his background. And it really was September 11th. And so it was that day, and I don't recall exactly when, but it was probably noon, early afternoon. It was when we sort of knew what had happened, probably because of the communications with the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. And so we had everyone outside our headquarters in Orlando under the flagpole. And Joe started talking to us. The first thing he says, we've got a lot of employees that are on the road. It's travel shut down. We need to figure out where they all are and make sure they're safe. The second thing he said was, we have a lot of employees who are Muslim, and they're going to be under incredible stress as we go forward. and we each need to make sure that we're there for them. And that was just striking, right? There's so many things going on that day in my mind, and all the things you think about. We talk about a disaster, and for him to sort of block everything else out, all of his personal anxieties, and get there second. I mean, that was amazing to me. I mean, that was an amazing example of leadership. And so it really is, as a leader, about thinking about everybody else first. And in his case, and I mean, I was, I lived in New York 15 years. I was thinking about a lot of things, but it wasn't our Muslim employee population. And he went there number 2, right after the folks that were stranded across the country.
Oh, that's a lovely story. I can see why it left a mark for you. Adena, how about you?
Well, I definitely haven't listened to the bad advice because I can't remember any of it. so that's probably good.
That's good.
And yeah, I don't remember any bad advice.
Good filters.
I think that, and I've had a great opportunity to get very good advice from a lot of different people along the way, and I appreciate it all. I appreciate every piece of advice I've ever gotten. But the one thing that has always stuck with me is that complacency is the killer of every great company, and so I have to earn my living every single day. And I honestly believe I have to earn my job every single day. And I've taken that with me. And it actually, I mean, I've always felt that way, but it really came home with the former CEO. He came in, we were not in good shape as a company, and he turned the company around and quite successfully. And we needed a leader like that at that time. And he did a great job of making the hard choices and the hard decisions to right size the ship and get us on the right direction. And then frankly, to help us grow into the international business we are in. But he definitely brought that approach to work every day, and it kind of wore off. And I have to say, I thought about, I have to earn my job every single day. And I have done that ever since he started, which was about 17 years ago. So,
wow.
And if you do that and you drive the company forward every day, what have you done today to make a difference? What have you done today to bring the company forward? Then you know that complacency won't seep in across the organization. And I think in our industry, it's an incredibly dynamic industry. There's an enormous amount of technology that we manage across the world. There's an enormous amount of change in data and other things that are coming. And so that complacency it will be a fast killer of any company in our industry. So we try to use that as a motivator every day.
That's great. And actually, one of my takeaways listening to both of you is also the importance of mentorship, that having really wonderful folks who give you that advice, but who are also mentors and models is so powerful. Jonathan, how about you? Do you have
hearing Adena just talk, I'll be very quick with one and then go more into the other. But my father has given me the best advice and too many examples of it. But one thing he would always say that Adena just touched on is be insecure and be paranoid all the time. Think about everything that can go wrong and can bite you in the ass. Don't think about good things that are happening. And if good things happen, understand they're ephemeral and fleeting, and be ready. And in some ways, it's exactly what Adena just said. The other thing he would say to me a lot, and still does, is that we're not in businesses that require great intellect, meaning we're not we don't engineer things. We're not creating new drugs to save humanity. We're in very basic businesses, and the culture really matters, and the quality of the work environment. And what he would say is, when you hire people the way he did it, he'd say, this is the way I look at it. The 3 things I look for first in potential employees are these people going to be people who, when I work with them, that they're loyal, that they're honest, and do they have a great work ethic? Because if they have those 3 attributes, we're going to have a good culture for what we are. He goes, you need smart, you can buy smarts. There's consulting firms, investment bankers, accounting firms, and there's not always a great correlation between intellect and those first 3 characteristics. And if you're in basic businesses, which is what we're in, those 3 traits are are much greater. Now, I'm lucky because I think the people that I work with are all so smart, but the level of loyalty and the work ethic and the integrity, we're just very lucky. And we've tried to figure out how to make hiring decisions based on those characteristics. And I think it's served us well.
Well, that's great. And it's a good segue. I'm going to move now to some of the questions that are coming in from our audience. And there's, I think, a great question that continues to have us think a little bit about the employees that work in your various organizations. So the question is, does anyone want to comment on requiring employees and staff to get their COVID-19 vaccinations either now or once they receive full FDA approval? And similarly about paying employees a small bonus or providing additional paid time off if they get vaccines. And I should say full disclosure that Williams is requiring vaccinations of its faculty and staff, although there are various exemption outlets that make it possible, I think, to address a range of concerns. But let me open this up to the three of you.
Well, I'll start. I mean, I think that first of all, we do operate a global business and the laws are different in every country. So we have to look at every single country around the world and say, what can we do or what can't we do? But at this end, at the same time, what we've tried to do is take a relatively universal approach to these types of policies because, you know, why is it right in one place and not in another? So I start with that. We are not requiring that employees get vaccinated in order to come back to the office. But we are watching very closely the statistics in each location in which we operate, each city and each state and each country in which we operate, and say, well, is there more? Are more than 50% of the population are they vaccinated? And then we are asking our employees voluntarily to provide their vaccination status, and in the hopes that they feel that they want to help by saying, I'm vaccinated and someone else is vaccinated. We can kind of come up with some aggregate stats that allow us to say that the majority of the office is vaccinated. And that then allows us to feel confident that in the coming months, we can reopen the office without the restrictions we have in place right now. But we are also not requiring any of our employees, well, I should say almost any of our employees, we have a few that do come in, but almost any of our employees to be in the office right now, not until September. So that's when in the US, we're likely to start to have it be that it's part of the job to be in the office for some period of time. So therefore, we have a little more flexibility not to have to put those requirements on our employees, and in the hope that the vaccine rollouts will really continue to take hold and we won't have to go there. And I also would say we can also, even within the office, operate in a socially distanced manner. So even if we had to, we could manage the operation with people being socially distanced. We're also going to try to create some zones within our larger offices that would allow people to remain socially distanced if they wish to. So we have those types we have a lot of flexibility there. So we're not requiring it.
Thank you. Clarence, how about you?
Yeah, I'd say I'm involved with a number of organizations and everyone's sort of taking a different approach, but none of them are yet requiring employees to be vaccinated. But they are moving down a path that gets pretty close to that.
Right.
And so office-based employees in some situations where collaboration is a critical part of what they do. I think in the fall, they will be strongly encouraging people to be vaccinated and strongly encouraging people to work in the office for some period of time. And I think the unspoken implication of that is there will be consequences for not being vaccinated, not being in the office.
Right.
That your progression will suffer as a consequence of not being there, even if they don't mandate it. And then on the other side, with the retailers and the restaurants, they're not requiring either, but they are requiring employees who are not vaccinated to continue to mask. Employees who don't have to mask, so there's strong social signaling going on to employees, among employees, and from employees to guests. And so they're exerting pressure. I think it's the best way to put it.
Using the organization to encourage best practice. Yeah, thank you. Jonathan, how about?
So today we don't mandate it, although we have, well, today we don't mandate it, but we've strongly encouraged it. And at our headquarters, which is the Kraft group, is actually based out of a development in Foxborough next to Gillette Stadium. We have been the largest mass vaccination site here. So we book appointments for people, and it was part of agreeing to be it. So we made it very easy. And then in our manufacturing businesses, which are across the country, anybody that wanted to get vaccinated, we paid them for the time off from work to go get it. And we do the masking as Clarence just defined it. But as soon as the vaccines come off of emergency use authorization, we're going to mandate it in all of our businesses, ex the medical and religious exemptions that I think you were referring to. I mean, it's just being responsible to everybody else in the place, and then the science has spoken for itself. So barring a religious reason or a medical issue, you're going to have it if you're going to be in our business.
And Jonathan, if I could just follow up with you, there's a question that's come in the chat that focuses specifically on in your area and asks if you lost any of your employees to COVID and how you dealt with that personally as a director of the hospital system.
So actually within the Kraft group, we have a lot of employees around the country and the world, and we lost 3 people to COVID. All 3 were people that worked they all worked in our manufacturing businesses. And it had it has a real impact on you because it makes this very real. I knew one of the gentlemen who lost his life, so that made it even more real to me. And you know, that was tough. At the hospital, we have, you know, knock on wood, not lost an employee to the disease, even though you know, the caregivers were on the front lines of this from the start. Fortunately, the protective measures that we took worked, and so I hope that answers the question.
I know we all lost so many, both 1 degree and multiple degrees of separation that made it very difficult. I see one question that's just come in the chat, which includes a special shout out, Adena, from Melissa Fenton for taking you out on your first passenger flight, getting your license and landing the plane flawlessly. So not too much panic there. But also ask the question to all of you as leaders, is there one thing you would like to be remembered for in your roles? And you know, you maybe we're not yet thinking of you as to the end of those roles, but still, as you think about your legacies, are there things you'd like to be remembered for? Great question. Adena,
well, first of all, I have a great photo of Melissa and me standing next to the plane, because she was the first person. Well, other than she was like one of the very first, if not the first person I took up after I got my license. So thank you, Melissa. I have to say, I really do feel like I'm too early in my career to be able to answer her question, to be honest with you. I really don't think about that right now. I really do look at kind of how do we continue to make great progress within the business? How do we continue to have as much of an impact on the capital markets as we can, a positive impact on the capital markets? You know, one of the things that we're focused on right now is building out. We have a large technology and data analytics business in addition to our exchange business, and an area of focus for us is anti-financial crime. So we have 2 very large-scale technology software businesses geared towards protecting banks and brokers and exchanges and regulators against financial crime. So, integrity is a big part of what we do here at NASDAQ. And so I guess if I were to say what I want to be remembered for is really helping shape the integrity of the markets and the integrity of the financial system. So that's probably, I guess what I would say, but I've got a long way to go before I can make that claim.
Yeah, but it is a great aspirational goal, and I have faith. How about you, Clarence? Do you give that any thought?
Yeah, I would say really, I think all of us want to be remembered for building a market leader, or in some cases, maintaining market leadership. And the way you do that, I think, is really to build leaders. And so I'd certainly like to be remembered for building an organization that was a leader builder and that contributed to its continued market leadership. It impacted the industry because a lot of those folks get exported out and we other organizations in the industry. And so in the restaurant industry, there are some leaders that really are the sort of root from which all these branches flow. And a lot of the leaders of the industry come out of those places. And I'd like to be remembered as someone that was one of those people that grew some of those leaders and made the restaurant industry a stronger industry, a more inclusive industry, a much more fun industry, much more equitable in terms of allowing people to build meaningful lives for themselves.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Jonathan, your turn.
Yeah, I don't reflect. Until you've asked the question, I've never reflected on this, and it's something.
Oh, come on, you got
honestly
not retired yet.
I'll tell you. I mean, like our head football coach always says when they ask him to reflect, he's like, "I'll reflect when I'm done." And I'm not putting myself, and he might even throw a colorful adjective in when he says it, but, which I won't do since I went to Williams. But it isn't. I mean, if I think about it now, I just, you know, whenever it is I'm done working, which is probably the day I step off the earth, I'd like whatever, you know, businesses and philanthropic organizations I've been involved with or anything else, just to maybe be a little better off than when I started. But that's because of who you're working with and you're a part of. You know, that's really it, I think, from my perspective.
I do appreciate that. And there's a question from Bill Tierney from the class of '86 that's is asking what communication skills are the most valuable in getting your enterprise through a crisis. Actually, I'm very anxious to hear your answer to this question because I have thought so much about communication through COVID and sort of links to things that we've learned, that we're doing better, things that we're really learning from mistakes in some ways as well. But I'm wondering for the three of you, what have been the most valuable in this?
I'll go first, which is authenticity and compassion. Really by far the most important communication skills you can have when you're managing an organization through crisis. I think that understanding what your employees are going through, having compassion for what they need the support they need to be able to manage through it, and then really being authentic. You know, the crisis was, the moments last March were very challenging for our organization and for the industry, and so saying that to them, you know, showing my authentic self. Like, it was interesting, before the pandemic, we would do a quarterly town hall with our employees and we turn it into a show. Like we have a studio here, so we can use the studio and do a lot, right? And make it look pretty professional. And then we got home and we were all sitting at home and you know, it's time to, I wanted to talk to employees every day, but we started doing it every week. And we just started on the phone. And I just told them what I was feeling and what I was thinking and how we were going to get through this together, and try to really make sure they understood we're all managing through this together. So let's work together and be together. And of course, throughout the year, different employees in different countries have had a lot of different challenges. You know, some schools have been open, some schools have not been open. Our largest office is in Sweden. So in Sweden, you know, they had a very different approach to the virus. And so, you know, how do we manage through the challenges that they were facing at a different time than we were here in the US? In India, we have a large operation in India, and right now they're facing the biggest crisis of all. And so having authenticity, showing compassion. I remember our Lithuanian team did a whole video, and it was a really cool video for the India office to say, we're with you, you know, holding up signs and talking, you know, it's just, you know, that kind of thing I think is so important to show that we're all having to work through these challenges together. We introduced a flex day program that at NASDAQ to allow our employees to take off just days off. If they needed a day off, they could take a day off in a certain number a month, and so that they can manage their family situations in addition to everything else. So, you know, that kind of compassion, authenticity, I think, is what's really gotten us through the crisis.
I got actually a piece of wonderful advice from a Williams alum who's well known in the public health world, who said that one really important thing to do in a public health crisis, but I think actually could translate to other organizations, is to talk about what you're going to do before you do it. That is to prepare people for difficult. So thinking about the topic we were just talking about a few minutes ago about requiring vaccinations, sort of letting your thought process not just suddenly emerge, but actually in that transparent way, thinking out loud in a sense, to help prepare. So that was a little piece that was shared with me that I'd love to share with the audience who asked the question. How about
I also think, I do think in a crisis, I mean, there are a couple of things. One is an important aspect of communicating is listening. You got to hear people and understand where they are, where they're coming from. And then the other is to show optimism. I mean, you got to be, regardless of how dire it is, ultimately, you've got to convey to people that you believe that there's an other side to this, and we're going to get there. So those are the two things I think that are very important from my perspective.
That's so true. Yeah.
I think from where I agree with everything Adena and Clarence said, and the one thing about communication, whether it's in a crisis or at any time, so many people that you work with might not be thinking about things as broadly as you. They just choose not to, don't want to, too busy and too caught up on what they're doing. And I think context setting is always really, really, really important. And don't ever underestimate how important it is to set context and paint a full picture of whatever it is that's going on. The second thing is related to the pandemic specifically. When people were sent home in March of last year, and you go, I mean, you know, at least here in Greater Boston, the general media tone was quite dire. We were surging early on, and there were lots of layoffs and things came. And so I think the second week of the people being at home or quarantined, we sent a communication. We just said, what's the thing that's going to really take the pressure off people in this crazy moment? And we talked as a family and just said, look, we're going to do things philanthropically. I kind of had a feeling that this was going to be a while. And I mean, I was lucky because of the hospital work. I mean, back in February, like Rochelle Walensky, who's now head of the CDC, ran our infectious disease department. I mean, she was telling me in February what a tsunami this was going to be. And so we sent a communication out to all our employees, those who were working, but more importantly to those who had been sent home and had no function, that nobody needed to worry about their jobs, that we were committing in March that through the rest of the calendar year, don't worry about whatever happens, you're employed, you have a job, and you know, we'll deal with this. And even then we underestimated it. And then so in December, I believe, or the end of November, when it was clear what was going on, we said, you know, this is good until next, I think we said April 1st or March 1st, I forget which, because sort of felt that might be when we were coming out. But still to this day, we haven't let anyone go. And, you know, now people who didn't have function are coming back. And I think, so those were the two things, context setting, and then in this crisis or in any, trying, if you can, and if you're lucky enough to be able to, putting people's minds to ease. And as a family, we just said, before we do any external philanthropy, which we did, let's take care of the people who are part of our internal family, because otherwise it's, if every employer does that, we're going to end up in a better place at the end of this if the people who can afford to do that do it.
Oh, that is wonderful. So unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of our wonderful, rich conversation. Let's have a lightning round last question, because it raises a topic close to my heart. Question has come in. What advice would you give to the class of 2021 as they emerge into the pandemic job, or I hope I can say post-pandemic job market? So any closing thoughts on that topic?
Well, I would
I would-
say be thankful you're not the class of 2020. And 'cause there's a lot of jobs. I got plenty of jobs. So anybody that doesn't have a job, write me a note.
Oh,
You'll
there
be
you go.
good.
You heard it here first.
I would encourage them not to look too far into the future. There's a
Yeah.
tendency to want to plan things out, plan out the next couple of years and then, see how it goes and really improvise off of how it goes. Because ultimately, you can't plan it. You really have to react to the dynamics that you're confronted with and the opportunities that come before you and how you feel about what you're doing and what you're not doing. And I think at their age, they spend too much time trying to plan it all out.
So true.
I think that's great advice. So the first thing I would say is remember that your career is at least 40 years long, right? And so it feels like there's this sense of urgency when you get out that you want to kind of get to the whatever the top of whatever field you're in very quickly, or you have this grand plan, as Clarence said. But a 40-year career means that you have a lot of opportunity to try different things. You have a lot of opportunities to take a step over to the side or take a step back and come, and do different things. So it doesn't have to be a perfect decision right off the bat. But I like what Clarence said, which is think about, plan for the next couple of years. Like, what do you want to try to do? What is it that piques your interest right now? In many fields, it's a very good job market. So maybe choose a field, something that's interesting to you, but that's a field that is a good job market right now. So you can get in, try it out, see what it's like, but don't think that you have to plan the rest of your career. It's a long career. So see it as enjoy the journey.
I have to say that is fantastic advice. I have often thought a liberal arts education prepares people for any path, but one of the things you really want to be open to is that it's not a predetermined outcome. And so much like you explore your courses, you can explore through the early parts of your professional life. And so that's, I think, probably good advice even in not pandemic times, but particularly helpful this round. So, well, we have come to the end of our time. I want to just really thank the three of you for spending some time with me here tonight and with some of the Williams alumni community. That we are kicking off our virtual reunion stretch here. And of course, I'm very anxious to get everybody back to campus. But insofar as, at least for this year, we remain a little bit constrained. What a wonderful way to kick off the week, to have a conversation with the three of you. What a testament really to not only to Williams, because you all have many other things and attributes and backgrounds, but a real testament also to this community that you are part of it. And I'm very pleased to have had this opportunity. So thanks to you all so much. I look forward to seeing you three-dimensionally at some point when we can all do so. But in the meantime, thanks for everything you've done and for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.